So you became a teacher because you wanted to teach students and impact lives for future generations, I'm sure. But what you didn't know is that you had to become a professional data keeper, professional lesson planner, a parent liaison, after-school coordinator, behavior specialist, therapist, surrogate mom, dad. Like the list goes on and on of all the things that teachers are expected to do. And one of the things that I think a lot of teachers are not super prepared for is how to deal with parents. God love them, but parents can sometimes be super difficult and give you just a lot of anxiety, especially when a parent is mad at you. So here are some tips on how to deal and defuse an angry parent. So today we're going to talk about proactive and reactive strategies on how to deal with parents that may not be so happy for you. For those of you who aren't teachers, yes, believe it or not, parents believe their children and come at teachers without knowing all the facts. So sometimes you just have to smile and do your very, very best and deal with an angry parent. In order to prevent it as much as possible, my proactive tip would be to communicate as much as possible. Now, your method of communication may differ based on how you want to do it. I've seen teachers that have a behavior sheet where every day they fill it in and it goes home, parents sign it, and they bring it back. In the world of technology, we have a lot of messaging apps. We have Class Dojo. Some of you might prefer phone calls. Some of you might prefer emails. However you communicate with the parents, I would recommend having a system where you can communicate their behavior on a daily basis so that if you have to call them one day and talk about their kid's bad behavior, it's not like it's out of the blue. Like they're not operating on the assumption that everything's fine. You have had, communication after communication after communication of all the reasons why that student is in trouble. Another proactive tip outside of just communicating every day is to get ahead of a story before the parent or before the student gets home and tell the parent. So there's an incident at school, 2 kids get in a scuffle at recess. Now, I swear at our school, we watch our kids very, very closely. But however, it just takes 1 second for a kid to go after another kid and it takes 5 seconds for us to get over there. So sometimes things can happen and it's unfortunate, but it happens when you got a bunch of kids in one place all together. So if there's a scuffle at recess and one of the students in your classroom was involved, call the parents. Like, don't think, oh, it's probably fine, no one got hurt. Just take it from me. When in doubt, make the phone call and make sure that the parents are aware. Or if at least you don't do anything else, if you have a messaging, say, there was an incident at recess, no one got hurt, I just want to let you know. That way, you control the story. It's not like the student comes home and I don't know if you have any students like this, but I have a few kids who will spin stories and lie. So they'll be in trouble, but they'll try to spin it like someone else is picking on them, and so now the parent is all wrapped up. Because you wouldn't think that parents would just take the 6-year-old or 7 or 8 or 9-year-old's word for it, but they do. And so if you get a chance to talk to the parents first, you can kind of prevent that from spiraling. Okay, so now let's talk reactive tips, okay? This has happened to me before, obviously without naming names or particular situations. I've had parents send me a message, call me, and just be very, very angry about something that either I didn't know about or a story that the student has twisted, or maybe they have a legit concern, but I didn't get a chance to talk to them or I didn't realize something was happening. So if that happens, I have some interpersonal skills to share with you. I don't know if any of you have had much experience with interpersonal skills, but here's some things that I learned when I took a class on it. So the first thing you have to do is be calm. Like if they are here, don't match them, stay calm. Don't get upset, and then step number 2 is listen. So if a parent is upset, they want to feel heard. 90%, and I'm just making that number up, but I feel like 90% of issues can be solved by if someone feels genuinely heard and listened to. So don't interrupt them, don't get defensive and say, well, this happened and what you don't understand. Just let them talk first, and I ask some clarifying questions so that they know that I'm listening to them, and just really try to see it from their side, because like you're thinking as a teacher, and I've got 20 kids to deal with, they're thinking like a parent, where they have one kid, their kid that they brought into this world and they're concerned about. So to them, it is a big deal. So just make sure that they feel heard and listened to. My next tip is, after you hear and after you listen, use reflective listening skills. So what that looks like is, let's use a situation where we'll pretend that a student in my class and a student in another class got into a fight, pushed and shoved, whatever, at recess. And the parent heard about it and was really upset because it wasn't their kid's fault, it was the other kid's fault or something like that. And so they're talking. So after I listen to them, I would say, okay, so what I hear you saying is that you're concerned because this isn't the first time that there's been a situation like this. It might be the first time, but they are thinking about stuff that's happened at home, stuff that's happened in the neighborhood. So whatever, just say things like, what I hear you saying is, if I'm understanding you correctly, your major concern is this. And here is a big tip for you. This is like gold. I'm in my 20s, so I don't actually have like biological kids. So I usually say something along the lines of, you know, if it were my kid, I would feel really, really upset and a little bit, nervous that this happened in school and they shouldn't have to deal with that at school. And if you are a parent, use that phrase like, if it were my kid, I would be upset too. Like, that's not okay. Like, agree with them. It's not okay that they got into a fist fight. So even if their kid like initiated it, just agree like, yeah, that's not fair. They should feel safe. Like, I totally hear you. I understand. And usually that's in the conversation where the parent is like, all right, you're on my side. And then they become much more agreeable and approachable and willing to hear you out. So you've stayed calm. You've listened, you've used reflective listening skills, and you've empathized with them and said, like, if it were me, I would be very upset about that too. I'd want to call in and learn some more information. You might even thank them. Like, thank you for being I can tell that you care. Because if you didn't care, you wouldn't be calling here and trying to talk. See, those are like the key phrases that get them on my side. So after that, they're on your side, you agree that it's wrong. You say what your plan is moving forward, okay? Now, in this part of the conversation, if you can work in any concerns that you have, you've heard their side, so they might be more inclined to hear your side of thing. So you talk, you empathize. Now, just so that you understand what's happening here at school, blah, 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 or just so you understand it from my perspective and why I didn't whatever they wanted you to do. Here's what happened and here's what I saw. Does that sound like what so-and-so says happened? So-and-so being their kid. So just say, this is what I observed. Is that what your student has reported back to you? And if there's some if it's not quite, if the story doesn't make sense, and say, I wonder if they are maybe not telling you all of, the situation, or, I'm an adult person and I had several adult people out there with me who saw X, Y, and Z happen. I wonder why they chose not to mention that to you. So it's like you're just thinking this for the first time, but really this is what you're getting at. So it's all about like wording it so that they feel heard and understood. And like, you're not attacking them. You're just trying to problem solve with them. And always say, so it doesn't happen again. Because their whole thing is they don't want it to happen again. So in order for it to not happen again, maybe your student shouldn't be mouthing off to so-and-so. Or like maybe your student kind of picked the fight and that's why that happened. So this is the part where you can start telling them things that they don't know and but it's getting them on your side. Like, you always have to talk like you're on the same team as them, and that you want their child to be successful, but you also want to make sure that it never happens again. So that's kind of how the framework of my conversations work. Now, sometimes you can do everything right and the parent is just like bound and determined to be upset. And if that happens, the best thing in my experience, and your experience with your administrators might be a little bit different, but in my experience, if I have done everything in my power to defuse the parent and talked about it and they still have an issue, then we can say, listen, if this is really a big concern of yours, why don't you, the principal, and myself meet and set up a time to meet when we can talk about this? Because two things will happen when you say that. Number one, just maybe this is just my experience, the parent will cool off and then they won't come in. Like they just needed to yell and you got to be their punching bag. And so like when it comes to taking actual further steps that require work on their part, they won't actually do it. So that'll just kind of like end the conversation. And B, if it's at a later date, again, they will have had time to cool off. They won't be in such a reactive state. And it will also give you a chance to brief your administrator, principal, dean, whatever, on what happened, kind of what the situation is, and what you think the parent wants. That way you two are on the same side and they can just be a witness to your next conversation. You know what I mean? It's sad that we have to think that way, but sometimes that happens. So those are my tips on how to deal with parents. Now, I've taught you how to deal with parents. If you, I kind of give you a script on how to talk to parents. If you want a script on how to talk with kids who are having a tough time in your room, I will link that free resource down below so that you can have a script for talking to both the parents and the kids. You'll know exactly what to say from now on. So check that out if that's interesting to you. I hope that you don't have to deal with very many angry parents. Hopefully you have wonderful parents who love you and send you presents and have well-behaved kids, but I've just been teaching in public education for far too long. I know that usually there's a couple of parents that are upset. So if that happens, now you'll know how to deal with them. So I will see you next week, everybody, and hopefully you don't have any angry parents.